What's up, amigos? It's the Prodigy Maker Show, episode 82, 82nd episode of the show. It's great to be back with you, Chris Lewit, top American junior coach and expert on the Spanish way of training. We're going to talk about the Spanish way of training today. I have a new book coming out, The Secrets of Spanish Tennis 2, or 2.0, as my publisher wants to call it. And I'm very excited. It's been a lot of work the last year, and it's actually coming to bookstores November 19th. So get excited, guys. I hope that you can enjoy it and you find value from the new book. There are a lot of updated chapters and new drills and philosophy and drills from Tony Nadal. I have a discussion about Alcaraz and the rise of Alcaraz and his style of play, and just many new drills, and all the information is updated because the original Secrets of Spanish Tennis was a very popular book, and I wrote it in before it was published in 2014, and I spent probably a few years getting that prep. So the information there is more than 10 years old, so I'm excited to share with you all updated information from Spain. And that's what this show is about. This show is about my last trip to Spain. I just went for a short trip to Barcelona with had 4 players there, and I was actually working the whole time. So I was coaching each day as well as observing practices. I went to 2 separate academies. Had players at Barcelona Total Tennis, which is a highly regarded academy in the northern part of the city, in the suburbs to the north. And I had some players at the Bordeaux Tennis Academy, Bordeaux High Performance, which is a small academy that a lot of people don't know about. It's the new academy that is being run by Luis Bruguera and Jordi Bardot. And Luis Bruguera is sort of the figurehead and the inspiration of the academy, and he trained all the coaches there. And the team is very strong. It's like the team from Bruguera. The old Bruguera Academy closed. So just for your information, if you're looking for a strong academy, the Bordeaux Academy is not as well known, and it's excellent. It's in Cornellà, which is just a little bit northwest of the city, or west of the city, so a slightly different area of the suburbs. So I wanted to talk about my trip and just kind of catch you guys up on what's going on with Spanish tennis. I know that Spanish tennis is changing. Spanish tennis in some ways has gone down in terms of the number of top players in the world now on the ATP Tour. I haven't checked the most recent count, but there were as many as 14 or 15 top ranked ATP players back in the day, probably early 2000s or late 90s. And now the numbers have definitely come down a bit. And I think there are some good potential juniors coming up, like Landaluce is one of them, or Landalus is one of them. And there's a couple other ones coming up in the 14s and 16s. So hopefully Spain has a rise of organic native players. But I think more importantly is that Spain has become the training ground for pros and top juniors in the world, alongside of Florida. Basically, Spain, different, especially the Barcelona area, Mallorca now with the Rafa Nadal Academy, and Valencia and Alicante, where Juan Carlos Ferrer has his academy, and there's many other good ones down there. Spain has become one of the leading destinations for training foreign players from around the world. So there's been a transition in Spain from just, they had this incredible rise and boom of native Spanish players, and now they are more focused on developing foreign talent, and they have their hand, and there's so many Spanish coaches developing foreign players now that a lot of people don't realize that although the numbers of Spanish players on the top rankings in the world have declined, the numbers of Spanish trained players in the world rankings is probably risen even since the 90s and 2000s. It's just incredible how many top players. Xin Wen is one that comes to mind right off the bat, the recent Olympic champion from China. But there's dozens and dozens of examples of elite professional players, both men and women, who are being trained by Spanish coaches or traveling with Spanish coaches, or they actually have their home base in train, or they spend a significant amount of time training in Spain. For example, Andrei Rublev comes to mind just off the top of my head, Russian player, but who's spent many, many years training in Spain. Xin Wen spent many years training in Barcelona, and the list just goes on and on. I detail some of that in my book. So on that point, I will say to you, one of my biggest observations from this trip was the rise of TEC. So many of you may not be familiar with TEC, but TEC is a nonprofit that is growing very quickly and promoting junior tennis in Spain. And they have a huge apparatus now. They are currently renting or leasing the courts at the Up Club in Cornellà, along with Bordeaux. But what's happening is they are building a multi-million-dollar facility in the north part of the city of Barcelona, and it's not ready yet. But it's from what I've heard, the rumor is it's an incredible facility, and it will be kind of like a national training center, or an elite training center. It's not run by the government, but it's run by a nonprofit. So it's a pretty remarkable thing that's happening in Spain. You have a nonprofit who is putting a lot of big dollars into growing tennis in Spain, and they've hired an elite staff of coaches, and they only take very elite, talented players, and they usually give them a one-on-one coach, or a coach shares two players at the maximum. The ratio is incredible. I was watching a lot of their practices this past week at the Up Club, and they usually have one coach for one player, or one coach for two players sometimes. Sometimes I saw players, with their own coach plus other staff members, like their own trainer and support staff. It was unbelievable, the level of coaching and quality of training that these players were receiving. They're all scholarship players, so TEC pays for everything. And apparently, I don't know if there's any strings attached, any sponsorship relationships like that, but TEC is a nonprofit that was founded by a former tennis player from Spain, and his name is Ferrer. So the official name is Carles Ferrer is the guy's name. I believe I got that right. Anyway, apparently he was a very successful businessman, either in banking, I think, or in finance, or maybe some other business ventures. And he was also an elite tennis player in Spain. And I believe he's passed away. But the organization has a mission to develop elite tennis players now in Spain. It's a brand new program that they've been doing since about 2020. So it's a very, very new program. And they're just sort of getting off the ground with this elite staff of coaches and recruiting players. And I was watching a number of their players and practices, and it looked very professional, very high tech, using a lot of science-based support. For example, I saw players using GPS vests, so they're tracking they're monitoring their training load scientifically, which I've never seen in Spain. They usually, in Spain, typically there's a Luddite mentality. Typically, classically in Spain, the coaches there have sort of pushed back on technology and modern tennis and science. It's something I wanted to talk to you guys about. But in this case, TEC is really on the vanguard of using using technology, using science to support its players, and they look very cutting edge with some. Looks like all the staff are former pros from Spain, and they just look like very professional. They all have. It looks like they have a lot of money behind this program. All the coaches have matching shirts and uniforms, and it just seems like a very well organized and well funded program. I noticed all the balls have their name on it. Uh, it, it reminds me of sometimes going like to the USTA national campus and seeing like the incredible like wealth that was behind that project. This reminds me of like a very wealthy, rich program that's well funded, and sometimes that can be good and bad. Sometimes players can get spoiled in that kind of environment, and I remember that the great Pato Alvarez from Spain always said that if you give a player luxury, they're going to underperform. So I don't know if that's the case with the new TEC program, but it's a huge story, I think, in Spain that no one's really talked about. I wasn't aware of the breadth and the depth that this program is going to. In fact, building its own facility. I just learned this in the past few weeks, and the level of coaching that's there and the type of players they're recruiting are the best juniors in Spain. So it's, I think, very exciting, and it just sort of connects to the story about how Spanish tennis is sort of on a decline. Rafa has retired, and the numbers from Spain are definitely lower than they were in the heyday of the great Spanish armada of players. But I think we're going to see a renaissance and a rebirth, especially with an organization like this putting a lot of money into funding players, their travel, their training. That's important. That can provide a big stimulus to player development in a country. It's very similar to what the USTA player development does here, but it looks like they have it's nonprofit funding, it's private funding, and there's no bureaucracy like there is with the USTA. So in a small country like Spain, an organization like this can have tremendous influence, and we may start to see more Spanish players rising soon into the pro ranks who are guided by TEC coaches and TEC programs. So just be aware of that. Something really big happening in Spain right now. The TEC influence, the sponsorship basically, or the promotion in Spain from Carles Ferrer and his nonprofit is a very powerful force right now in Spain. When they build their brand new facility in Barcelona, in the northern part of the city, it sounds like it's going to be very impressive and incredible. But you have to be one of the hand-selected few to be able to train there. It's not an open academy where anybody can go and visit and train. So that's interesting. So I wanted to share that with you guys. Related to this development is the question that I started the program talking about. Is Spain going down? What's happening in Spain? It's definitely true that the legends are passing by. Rafa is gone, and we have Alcaraz, or Spain has Alcaraz, which is very exciting. And he is a legitimate superstar. He's already won 4 Grand Slams. I talk about this in my book. But we don't know if he's going to be as successful as Rafa, if he will perhaps get injured or fade away. I think that's always a risk with Alcaraz. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. What Rafa did is just incredible. He's clearly one of the greatest players of all time, and he had a tremendous impact on the game. So Alcaraz is still there for Spain. I guess if you're skeptical of Spanish training methods, like I get emails and messages from people who don't think there's a specific type of Spanish training, or they say that all the Spanish players are on steroids and there's no system there. They just work hard. I get a lot of noise that comes to me because I'm the expert on Spanish tennis who wrote the book. I don't really buy that. I think there's a very clearly well-defined method in Spain that you can see the commonalities. I've studied with all the legends in Spain. I've over almost 20 years now, and to me there's a very clear methodology. There's a clear system of drills. There's a clear philosophy, a very common philosophy, common threads that all the top coaches believe in, or drills that they use, for example. But Spain is definitely changing, and changing in some ways rapidly. The rise of TEC is one example. I think the top academies like Juan Carlos Ferrer's Academy and Rafa Nadal Academy, the academies that are surviving and thriving are embracing modern tennis. That could be with technology, that could be with statistics, that could be with sports science. Basically embracing science. That was a main takeaway that I took on my last study trip, that many of the traditional academies in Spain were basically Luddites. They didn't like technology, and they shunned science, and now I think that has to change. It has to change for Spain to compete. And many of the older academies that have older coaches there, or some of the original legends, the academies that have been around for a long time, they need to adapt, and they need to bring science and cutting edge tech into their training programs and curriculums and philosophy, and some of them are doing that and some of them are not. And I think the examples of places in Spain that are more cutting edge are Rafa Nadal and Juan Carlos Ferrer's Academy, for sure. And I think some evidence of that is the rise of so many good players coming from those academies, especially Juan Carlos Ferrer's Academy, which is really quite small, and they've produced a number of top ATP players, including a world number one, Carlos Alcaraz, and before that, Juan Carlos Ferrer himself was also number one. So you see some of the academies sort of on the cutting edge, leading the way, on the vanguard of more modern tennis. A part of that is also the tennis philosophy, playing more on hard courts, taking the ball earlier on the rise, maybe spending a bit more time on the serve and return. Traditionally in Spain, some of the players were allowed to hang back. Traditionally in Spain, players played almost exclusively on clay. Traditionally in Spain, the serve is seen as kind of a way to start the point rather than being developed into a tremendous weapon. Traditionally in Spain, players grinded and played a lot of defense. They weren't as aggressive and proactive, and that is changing a lot as well. So there's changes on the tennis side, changes on the technology side, and changes on the sports science side in terms of how the athletic trainers work, in terms of how much science is brought into the training on the court and off the court, both in, for example, with load monitoring and intensity monitoring and things like that, and just all sorts of ways that science can help develop tennis players. Other academies in other parts of the world are starting to do that, and Spain really needs to adapt to survive if they want to remain as one of the greatest destinations for tennis training in the world, which I think it's pretty clear they are one of those places right now, along with perhaps Florida. Now you see an academy like Piatti comes to mind in northwest Italy. I may make a visit to Piatti this summer, but you see Piatti, which is a small academy, and they're doing very professional, cutting-edge, modern training, and they use a lot of science-based principles. They use evidence-based. They do evidence-based training there. Piatti's method reminds me very much of the Spanish method. There's a lot of focus on receiving the ball and footwork and movement and balance in the early parts of the Piatti method. So I see some of that methodology drifting into Italy. Italy's having a lot of success right now. I think that's an interesting story. Spain is not far from Italy in Europe. And I think a lot of the Italian coaches have specifically and very thoughtfully studied the Spanish successes, and they've taken the best of what they're doing in Spain and they're trying to build on that in Italy. And it looks to me like they're building on that in a more cutting-edge scientific way, which eventually it's conceivable that Italy could supplant Spain as a destination for tennis, and that some people are choosing to go train in Italy now, maybe to get a little more of that modern scientific cutting-edge approach. And Italy has taken much of the principles from Spain into some of the drills, the focus on movement and footwork, the focus on sacrifice and suffering and hard work. That I think that has become more commonplace in Italy. which for many years was a country known for its talented players, but maybe players who weren't willing to suffer as much. And I think that's changing now. You see that with Sinner, who's so successful. So that's an interesting trend. I think that if you just look at the rough numbers for Spain, they're definitely down in terms of Spanish-born players in the ATP. You do have some good female players like Badosa, who's now back in the top 10. She was number 2 in the world. So it's always nice to see some female players in the top ranks. Spain has historically never had as many female players in the top 100 at the pro level. I usually attribute that to participation rates, and in some ways there is a macho culture still in Spain where the boys tend to get a little more attention than the girls, and there's fewer elite coaches working with the girls. Hopefully that's changing, but that has been an issue in Spain. Both the culture where boys get sort of the boys get more attention, and also the participation rate for boys comparing boys and girls in Spain has typically been lower in sports for women, especially in traditional society there, culturally. So as more females play and more coaches take females seriously and give them the same level of attention and training that they deserve, there's no reason why you wouldn't see female Spanish champions like Nadal and like Alcaraz and Juan Carlos Ferrero and Carlos Moy and all those great male Spanish players that we've had. Don't forget, there was Arantxa back in the 80s and 90s who did also make number 1. I believe Arantxa made number 1. And it was an incredibly hard worker, but that's more of an aberration back then. There was also Conchita Martinez, who won Wimbledon in the 90s. So there have been some great female Spanish players, but really not nearly as many as the men. The men have dominated, and the famous story of Spain's rise is a male-dominated story. It's about men on the ATP tour. So yeah, I think there's some consistent problems that I see in Spain that have not changed over the years. I've talked about this in numerous videos. I would say it's really a wake-up call for Spain. For example, using science, using technology, using evidence from research to guide training, and both on the court and off the court. Both on the fitness realm and on the tennis court, off court and on court. Using technology like just even simple video analysis or statistical analysis. I think these things are still not commonplace in Spain with many of the coaches and academies. Video analysis for technique is a good one. Working on the serve. The serve is the best stroke in tennis to video and analyze and work on because it's stationary. And I think all across Spain they could upgrade the training of all the players there if they just took out their phones, filmed, and learned some biomechanical things and studied technique and helped all the players with their serve technique. I've been saying that for decades now. I've been traveling to Spain almost 20 years. And I've said repeatedly that I can't understand how in Spain they basically, many academies neglect the serve. They don't work enough on the serve, so not enough volume, not enough attention is given. And very rarely do you see a Spanish coach using even their phone, let alone higher level motion capture or higher level of software video analysis, that just using your simple phone to look at technique. I have seen it with some good coaches like Francis Roig, for example. I saw him use his phone at BTT. I see that they use PlaySight. They use video analysis at Juan Carlos Ferrero's academy. They use video analysis at Rafa Nadal Academy. But there are many academies I could name where the camera's never taken out and you just grind and work, and it's basically like training in an era before tech. It's like going back in time 30 years, training on the red dirt, never checking anything with video, not using science to guide. to give us principles of training. I think it's crazy, and neglecting the serve. I can't tell you how many times have I said it. You see a typical Spanish practice, and it's hour and 45 minutes of ground strokes. Not much work, very little work on the return, very little work on the serve. The serve is, a time for the coaches usually to take a break at the end of the Spanish practice. Typically. I've seen that so many times, I can't tell you guys. That should change if the country wants to be competitive with other countries. Using video, using statistical analysis for analytics to help tactics and patterns. That should be part of the curriculum there and the philosophy. And then upgrading all of the athletic training to use more science-based approaches. Some good trainers in Spain are doing that, but my understanding from the research and talking to experts in Spain that there are just a large proportion of Spain of trainers, athletic trainers and strength and conditioning coaches who are not on the cutting edge in terms of using evidence-based approaches to help the athletes there. So I think there's still a lot of examples of that. Yeah, so what else could be better in Spain? Those I think are the biggest things. They are playing more in hard. A lot of the places are playing more in hard courts. A lot of the academies and coaches believe in playing a bit more aggressive. Alcaraz is a great example of a player who grew up in that environment at Juan Carlos Ferrer's academy. They allowed him to experiment and be creative and attack. And I've said before that he is an example of like Spanish tennis 2.0. Just in himself, he's so dynamic and popular, and he's going to transform Spanish tennis single-handedly, where you're going to see more players playing like him, using the drop shot to attack frequently. Playing defense, good defense, grinding when he has to, but also moving forward and taking the ball early and going to the net with crisp volleys. Alcaraz is so special the way he plays, and I really think he embodies like Spanish tennis 2.0. He's a great model. He's a prototype of the way you may see future Spanish tennis players playing, And what will happen is the academies and the coaches in Spain will also model that in the drills they create and the messages that they give to young kids there, how to play. 30 years ago or 40 years ago in Spain, probably more of the messages were hang back, grind, be steady, outlast your opponent. That was a big emphasis for Pato Alvarez with many of his students. Outlast your opponent. Not all of them. Pato Alvarez had Sergio Casal, who was a very aggressive net player, serve and volleyer back in the 80s and 90s. But in general, Spain has been known for its defense, and the players play deeper in the court, and they usually are very, very patient. And Alcaraz does some of that, but he also has an impatient side, an aggressive side where he presses, and he moves forward more than the typical Spanish player. And I think you'll start to see Spanish players playing more like that, but hopefully retaining the essence of what made Spain so great, which is the suffering, the incredible physical conditioning. Alcaraz is a beast, and he's a great example of how important fitness is to the Spanish way of training. Hopefully the emphasis on movement will remain, but just adding these extra benefits, these extra weapons, on top of the traditional Spanish approach. I think that's the way hopefully it does go for the future of Spanish tennis, and that Spanish tennis is not completely corrupted by players trying to go, not working on their fitness hard, not suffering, forgetting how to suffer, forgetting how to grind, forgetting how to play defense. Hopefully that's not what happens in Spain. Hopefully they're able to take the best of what they used to do and then add on some of the new innovations that Alcaraz has proven work very well, things like that. That's how you'd like to see, or I would like to see the country grow and compete. I remember speaking with Jose Higueras, and he always talked about how countries are all competing against each other, and all the federations are learning from each other. And I think that's happened very clearly here. As Spain dominated, little country, all the other countries looked to them. I looked to them. I started traveling there to study and learn. And I wrote a book that I shared with the whole world that explained the whole thing. So any smart leader of any federation, any national coach from other countries in Europe or around the world could just pick up a copy of my book or follow some of my videos on YouTube, and they can learn all about how Spain does it and their whole philosophy and teaching method and how they were able to lead the world. And you'd be a fool not to do that. I know many federation leaders and coaches have read my book. They enjoyed it, and they took lessons from it. Jose Higueras recommended my book. He wrote a recommendation for my book when it first came out. He wanted all the USDA coaches to read it, and I think examples like that, but also examples of coaches just watching Spanish coaches work. The proliferation of Spanish coaches all across the world, in Asia, in Europe, in America, in the US. I've seen dozens and dozens of Spanish coaches coming to work in the US now. People open their eyes and ears and they learn from what Spanish coaches are doing around the world. It could be on the pro tour or just at academies. And so other coaches and other countries have adapted. They've evolved. They've added some of the drills. They've added some of the philosophy. It's like everybody knows about suffering now. Everybody knows the X drill now. Everybody knows how to do the wall. Maybe better or worse, maybe not as good as they used to do it in Spain or arguably, but people know a lot of what the secrets of Spanish tennis. That was the book that I wrote in 2014, The secrets are out. So in the last 10 years since 2014, what's happened? You see a lot of other countries using Spanish methods, a lot of other countries and coaches using Spanish drills. A lot of other coaches and countries teaching Spanish philosophy are stealing some of the good stuff from Spain, like the suffering. And I recommended that in my book. I said, you can take this stuff and enhance your own systems. And that, I think, essentially what I wrote has come true around the world. Other countries are doing better. Italy is a great, great example, very specific example. A close neighbor of Spain. They've taken many of the good things from Spain, and they're doing it. They're promoting a lot of good players. You put money into it, like the way TEC is putting money behind Spanish players now. If the federation in Italy, puts money into the players, they get the coaches on board, they get some good talent, apply some Spanish philosophies, upgrade their approach, and then maybe add some science and some tech, and get lucky with some good players. You see other countries are doing it. The United States is doing a lot better. The United States is a great example of that. The United States had Jose Higueras in charge of their development for many years. That's a Spanish guy. They hired a Spanish guy. You guys know that, or you may know that story. You see the U.S. has a lot of top players now in the pro ranks. The men have finally made that big move. We have a lot of top American players now. They were all guided by Jose Higueras and his team in the early 2010s. I think those are really good examples of. But also Asia. Asia is a great example. Xinwen is a great example. It's happening all over Asia, where Asian countries, China and other countries in Asia, India, they like the Spanish way of training. They like the methodology, the idea of suffering, the repetition, the hard work. It appeals to many of the people in that region. And there have been many Spanish coaches who have migrated to Asia. I've documented this in my book. I talked about this in my book. There are many Spanish academies that have set up training centers in Asia, particularly China. And there are many Asian players who have moved to Spain to train. Xinwen being the prime example. She moved to Barcelona. She trained with Per Riba, and she still travels with him. So you just see there's just dozens of other examples of that too. Russian players love to train in Spain. There's a huge connection between Russia, Eastern Europe, and Spain. They blend very well together, and there's like a synergy that's created with, you get tall Russian or Eastern European players who are trained. They train hard in Spain, or they train hard with a Spanish coach. They learn how to move better, and they learn how to grind, and it just there's a wonderful synergy that happens when a tall Eastern European player who's well technically trained connects with the Spanish way. And you see that with Rublev and Kachanov and countless other players historically, even going back to like Murat Safin and his sister Dinara Safina, who both made #1 in the world. There's just a huge pipeline from Russia and Eastern Europe to Spain, and just they like the Spanish way of training as a finishing school. It's like it's a common pattern that you see. So you can just imagine that you have this little country, Spain. They figured out this gem of a teaching methodology. They have this diamond of a system, and then what are they supposed to do? How can they stay on top every decade? I don't know if it's possible, because they're not in a bubble where like no one else learns stuff. I got over there in 2000, in the early 2000, mid 2000s, and I was able to figure it out. And I wrote the book and shared it with everyone, but not just me. Other people went to Spain to learn. And then Spain got bigger and better and started traveling. Coaches started traveling all over, and academies popped up in other countries, and everybody learned. Everybody learned, and everyone got better, So this is the way I see the recent history of Spanish tennis. So it's not like Spain's failing. It's just everyone else is getting better, but they are failing in some of the things I mentioned, like working on the serve, science, incorporating science, working on the return. Those are my big criticisms of Spanish tennis, just in terms of the methodology. But I've been saying that for almost 2 decades now. So guys, I wanted to talk about a few of the good things in Spain just before we wrap up, and then maybe talk about the future of Spanish tennis. But I had, on my last study trip, I get to spend just a week in Spain, and I've had so many trips to Spain, and it's nice for me just to have some days to observe Spanish coaches working and see what they're doing well and what they're doing not so well, and you see the same themes that happen year after year, and it also just gives me time to reflect and think about the growth and development of Spanish tennis and where Spanish tennis is going. But what are the great things that they do in Spain? Like just a reminder, because I don't want to sound negative, but they teach the suffering. By the way, these are all things that other places are now doing. Like you start talking about the great things that Spain does, and now for the first time, maybe around the world, people say, but that's not unique. Everybody does that. But it didn't used to be that way. Spain used to be on the cutting edge with with all the things that they did well. But now everybody's caught up. Everyone's like, oh yeah, we do that. We know how to do it. We believe in that. Suffering. The physical training, just going big on strength and conditioning and off-court work and becoming a beast. That type of focus priority is very common now, and so Spain is no longer unique in that respect, that they want to be the leader in tennis fitness. They want to have the fittest players in the world. Everyone's trying to compete with that now, so they have less of an edge in that. The same with suffering. Everybody knows about suffering now. You teach players to suffer and grind, and you develop that fighting spirit, and other countries are trying to do that now. These are the good things that Spain does. Spain does ground strokes really well. They do the big forehand, the big modern topspin forehand, and they do that really, really well. They do consistency well. They develop great movers. But other countries have caught on. Piatti figured it out. He's doing lots of footwork and movement as some of his fundamental priorities over there in Italy. And his academy's booming, is very popular now. These things are happening now everywhere in the world. Movement. Everybody knows we got to really prioritize the movement. Everybody knows basic Spanish principles, like you got to receive the ball and you have to send the ball with balance and control. And you see a lot of these themes around the world now that wasn't necessarily the case before. Effort, hard work. Spain has demonstrated to the world that a little country with some good talent can just put in just sheer amounts of, just incredible amounts of hard work and start to get results. You don't think Italy took note of that? And now there's Italian players popping up everywhere. Something changed, other countries competing better. What's the future for Spain? Emilio Sanchez wrote a very interesting post recently, kind of an op-ed opinion piece, where he criticized Spanish programs, especially the academies, for focusing on foreign players and not developing enough native-born talent. And he said the money is with the foreign players. And Emilio said that he actually blames himself to some extent, where like the Emilio Sanchez brand of academies, and Emilio's great. He wrote the foreword for the new book, by the way. He's super knowledgeable. He's very wise and a very savvy business person as well as coach. And he basically said, I take some of the blame too. I've been focusing on foreign players too. And he basically gave a call to action to all of the Spanish academies and the club system in Spain, the clubs that are part of the club system, to refocus on developing native-born players, to try to develop a renaissance of Spanish players by focusing more on kids who are Spanish, rather than just taking foreign players like I was talking about from Asia, from other parts of Europe, from Eastern Europe and Russia, which has become a big part of the approach in Spain. A lot of the tennis training is training foreigners in Spain now. A lot of people don't realize that. It's very much foreign player based. So he criticized that. And interestingly, he didn't mention TEC, because TEC is basically responding to that criticism and saying, you know what, we are going to do it ourselves. We are going to take our coffers, our money, all the money we have, and we're going to plow it into junior development, but we're going to do it ourselves with our own coaches and our own at our own training facility, multi-million-dollar training facility. That's not really what Emilio was talking about. He was saying, all the clubs and academies across Spain should come together and focus on the grassroots and focus on native-born players. And TEC is, they might need that approach. That may be very, very important, what Emilio's saying, but TEC's basically swooping in and saying, very much like the USTA used to do, we'll take that player, we'll take you, and they're taking them. As far as I know, I think the players have to work with the TEC coaches. It's not like, I don't think the way TEC operates, and I don't know this for sure, I'll have to check. I don't think they operate where they say, oh, you're really talented, you can stay with your home coach and we'll pay for it. My sense is they are operating like a traditional federation would, where traditionally federations would say, well, if you want our money, you got to come train with our coaches. So it's kind of like cherry picking the best players in Spain. I think that's what's happening, but I have to confirm that. I don't know for sure, but basically, so that may work, or it could backfire. Like I mentioned, it may work. It may be a huge, powerful force to develop Spanish players, but as we know from lessons in other countries, sometimes throwing a lot of money and cherry picking the best athletes and divorcing them from their training set up with their home coach and their family and things like that can sometimes go pretty badly. That can cause the players to underperform. So hopefully in Spain, the way TEC approaches developing players doesn't make some of the classic mistakes that have plagued federation high performance programs and player development programs for many years. Hopefully they don't fall into that trap. But I don't know. I don't know what their protocols are for developing players. That's a very interesting question to explore, actually. So the future in Spain is right now as one of the leading destinations for training. They have an elite training system that works really well for foreign players, and they're a little bit underperforming right now for native-born players. So the Spanish players themselves are, aside from Alcaraz, are not dominating the world tour as much. There may be some juniors coming up where that kind of fill in the ranks, but I think if you look at the numbers on my last check, I think Spain was down around 6 players in the top 100. I want to be generous by maybe saying 7. I checked in the past year. I haven't checked for this podcast, but someone could check and let me know. If it's down around 6 or so, that's pretty low for Spanish players, compared to like 14 or 15. And Italian players are a little bit higher. French players are, I think we're at 8 in the top 100. And American players were also, I think we had, I want to say almost 10 American players at a recent count that I did in the top 100. Someone please fact check that. But a pretty significant amount of American men in the top 100. So that's very exciting for the US. Yeah, so what's going to happen to Spanish tennis? I think Alcaraz has a chance to become a legend. We'll see what happens. Does he stay humble? Does he stay healthy? Those are really the big questions. He has the potential to be another Spanish, storybook player, legendary player. And maybe programs like TEC will do the right thing and develop the native-born talent. Maybe the clubs in Spain and the academies in Spain will start reaching into the grassroots and refocusing on the grassroots and native talent again. Juan Carlos Ferrer's academy did just that. They developed Alcaraz, a local boy who grew up not far from the academy, and they developed him into a #1 player. Emilio is basically saying we need a lot more of that in Spain, finding the best talents and cultivating them. And I think in the next decade, for sure, Spain will continue to be one of the greatest places in the world to train. People want to go there. It's not only a great country just to visit. There's a lot of interesting tourist attractions, beautiful beaches, and very friendly people. But there's these just countless elite places to train. So I think that will most likely continue. And I just think for anyone who's interested in Spanish tennis and understanding what's happening in Spanish tennis, it's important to understand that the numbers that you see, you have to kind of look beyond just the native-born players, and to really understand the success of the Spanish method, the Spanish way of training, you have to look at all of the foreign players who are training in Spain or traveling and training with Spanish coaches. I think that's a really important part of the story that you have to understand to appreciate the expert level of coaching and the quality of the method, the methodology and the training that Spain provides, the Spanish coaches provide. You've got to understand what's changed, and also understand that the whole world is competing better. Other countries have essentially stolen many of the great things that Spain does, and they're weaving those principles and methods into their own systems. And so it's tougher. It's tougher for Spain to win out there. And that happens, I think, with every country historically. You saw that the Australians were on top for many years. The Americans were on top for many years. There were the Swedish players, for example, with Borg and Wilander and many other greats. They had their heyday too, and Spain had a long run at the top of the world for such a small country. And I think it was just inevitable that they couldn't maintain that forever, and they couldn't maintain that forever facing competition from other countries who are learning and adapting and evolving themselves. They're watching carefully. They could read my book. They may have read my book. Nowadays, there's incredible advancements in communications technology where you can watch videos of what other countries are doing. Like, it never used to be like that. If it was the 60s or 70s, the only way you'd know what was happening in Spain or in Sweden Or in Australia would be to go there physically, or to maybe talk to a coach who's been there, or make a phone call or something. Now you can see videos of different training methodologies around the world. You can follow coaches on Instagram and socials and their YouTube channel, and just that technology alone has allowed for other countries and other federations to learn very, very, quickly, and to catch up and to compete better and evolve. Basically, the rate of evolution on a countrywide basis, or country versus country basis, is much faster now because of the incredible communications technology and video sharing technology that we have. So that's another trend to watch for. As countries evolve quickly and they adapt to each other, are more systems going to be, do we see homogenization of professional tennis, where you see more and more players training similarly because there's less and less mysteries, there's less and less pockets of unique training. Everybody knows what everyone else is doing, and science is getting involved, and evidence. The more that coaches follow evidence-based practice, you should see players around the world, and even in different countries, training similarly as they become rooted in science-based practice, and also where there's fewer and fewer secrets out there, because we all know what everyone's doing because of the advancements of communication technology. These are some of the topics I sort of touched on in my new book, Winning Pretty, which is a technique and biomechanics book, but it is germane here, where countries are learning fast, they're adapting, and they're adopting new practices, and they're evolving. And it's hard for a country like Spain to just, dig in and work hard, and nobody knows what they're really doing, and then take over the world. It's harder for a country to do that because everyone else is essentially spying on each other. Everyone's spying on each other. All the federations are spying on each other with newfangled technology. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this review, sort of reflection on Spain, the current state of Spanish tennis, and my recent trip to Spain. These are the thoughts that were going through my head as an author and as a coach, and just as a fan of Spain. I love Spain as a country. My family loves to visit Spain. We've been there many, many times, and I've learned so much from the Spanish way of training, studying with some of the legends in Spain. And I'm always asking myself, what's going to change? What is changing? What's coming next in my lifetime? And I think that this is what I said about the future is what's going to happen. We'll see if Spain can make a comeback with native-born players, and we'll see if Spain can remain at the top of the list of world destinations for training, for elite training. I think that's highly likely. I don't know if Spanish players will be able to come back on top. And we'll see what happens with Alcaraz, because he's a major part of the story of Spanish tennis. Without Alcaraz right now, I think Spanish tennis would really be in the doldrums, and people would be very worried and sad. But he has injected this incredible energy into Spanish tennis and helped the reputation of Spain too. So guys, I appreciate you listening and sharing the show with friends. Please leave a 5-star review if you like the podcast. If you're listening to the podcast, not watching the show on YouTube, really helps us grow the podcast. We're trying to grow the podcast, and we're trying to grow our YouTube channel. Please leave a like and share the video or the podcast with friends, because that helps us grow as well. And please be on the lookout for my new book, Secrets of Spanish Tennis 2.0. I talk about some of the themes I discussed today. And remember, the book it's still the same book as the first one, but it's upgraded. It's 2.0. It has all new updated information, so about all the academies and rankings and things like that. It has new chapters. I feature some new coaches like Tony Nadal and Antonio Cascales, who developed Alcaraz, and Juan Carlos Ferrero and Jofre Porta. And so I talk about some other legends in Spain, what their influence is and their style of teaching. I talk more about Pato Alvarez and Luis Bruguera, and they're going into a little more depth about their methodologies. And there are new drills. Most people like the book for the drills. There's new Spanish drills, some more advanced drills, some drills from Tony Nadal. I think there's a lot of interesting things in there. If you want to stay up to date and current on Spanish training methods and philosophies, it's a perfect book. It's coming out in time for the holidays, so hopefully you get one of those, or maybe get one for a present for somebody you know. I promise you it'll be a high quality book. I put a lot of time and effort into the book. Many, many iterations, many drafts, many late nights and early mornings writing and editing. And I think you guys will really appreciate and enjoy the book. So I will see you guys on the next program. God bless and adios.